So, Becky Robbins, extraordinaire. History of Robert H. Jackson Center. Kathy Evans says Becky Robbins was hired as the first part-time development director. During 2003 and 2004, the graduate of Grove City College in nearby Pennsylvania worked primarily with Kidder, but spent endless hours with board officers Peterson, Sweeney, and Carlson in planning sessions, and so on. The whole huge, almost page of Becky Robbins in this book. This Jackson Center is really much about history and the legacy of Jackson, and history sort of came natural to you from your mother. And I want to have you talk just a little bit about your mother, Elfrida Irwin. How did she get interested in this, background, and she became Chautauqua Institution librarian, historian extraordinaire? How did that happen?
Well, I believe she was an English major at Ohio Wesleyan University, and loved to write, of course. And then when our family had a house at Chautauqua, I believe I was probably in children's school at the time. She was hired as a reporter, and like you, she got to interview lots of people in the orchestra, people in the Cleveland Playhouse, and so on and so forth. And then she became the editor, and she just liked people, and she just loved the history. She just loved Chautauqua. And she began writing a history, just a small book, called 3 Taps of the Gavel. I think she had 3 versions of it, but I was a senior in high school, and she was like you, Greg. Anything you were talking about, she would bring it back to, such and such has happened and such at Chautauqua. So she just loved Chautauqua, she loved the people, and she wrote that first book, and then she retired as the daily editor, but Dr. Robert Hess made her, I think she was some honorary title at the Daily, and then she was called the historian. So it was just a little part-time job, kind of how most of us started at the Jackson Center, and she was there for hours and hours and on weekends helping people who came in to research Chautauqua for their academic work. Or there was another author who wrote, I forget what that book is called, but it's about that thick, and Theodore Morrison. So she just helped a lot of people study the history.
Did that naturally evolve so that when you're around the dining room table, did your mom talk about it a lot?
Yeah, I can remember walking down the street at Chautauqua, and we were all talking about something else. And then she brought up, oh, well, that happened and such, and we kidded her, and I told members of your family that, they shouldn't be too rough on you, because I remembered how we teased my mother, but I know you were that way about the Jackson Center. And then when I was in college, I was English and history as a major, and mostly the history classes I took were writing classes. So I've always liked history, and my whole family, my husband Dale, and we all love history. So I don't know if that came down from my mother, and most of what I liked about history was writing about it at the time.
Mm-hmm. So how did you connect with the Robert H. Jackson Center? I'm not sure I even know the story.
Well, I'd worked at Chautauqua Institution in the development office for years, and then with my children, I finally stopped doing that. But I always kept my finger in writing grants for the YMCA and doing this and that, and I was on the WCA Foundation and always interested in fundraising. And so I started out as a 10-hour-a-week person as the executive director for the WCA Foundation, because Murray Marsh, you remember him, mm-hmm. had retired, and the foundation, the paperwork had all sort of been allowed to flow as far as agreements for endowment funds and so forth. So Bill Evans hired me, and I was still on the foundation board, but anyway, I did that for about 3 years, but I was more interested in fundraising and spending more time at it, and the hospital really wasn't ready to do that, even though the foundation was. So I just put out some feelers. Randy Ordinas is Dale's cousin, and I've known him from working with the foundation, and Randy Sweeney. I think those were the main two, and then Randy or somebody called and said Raleigh Kidder needed an assistant, and so Randy sent up a lunch with you and Raleigh and Randy, and we talked about that, and then I worked in February as the whole month just as a volunteer, I remember, but I kept the regular hours, and you called me program associate, but it was sort of, we all did everything. Mm-hmm. And that's how I started.
So you start there day one. Who's there other than Raleigh? Anybody?
Just Raleigh. Fran, and she was in and out when I was first there. I know that she had been asked to take that job and didn't want it, but she was there quite a bit. And I think the first day, it strikes me that the Weeks room was empty and that there were no radiators at all in them, and so it was really cold. I remember wearing long underwear, and that was being renovated, so I don't know how long that lasted, but we closed the doors and were warmer. And then another day, new windows were put in on a cold day when it was snowing, and Richie, his last name,
Farrell?
Yes, thank you. He was there a lot, and they put all these windows in the middle of winter. But it was just Raleigh. I think I was only working 20 hours a week, but Raleigh, I sat in that front room with the green fireplace, I think, or the green paint anyway. Mm-hmm. And Raleigh was in the next room. So when my hours were up, technically, we would talk religion and politics, and it was a lot of fun. And so then I ended up eventually going to 25 hours, 30 hours, 35, and I think some weeks we all worked like 60 or 70 hours a week because we were so excited about everything.
Yeah. So this would have been 2000?
I think it was 2003 in February.
February 2003. So that would really, we had probably just had announced that Rehnquist was coming.
Yeah, a little after that. Yeah, and that was quite the thing. So
because all of that triggered the renovations that were probably on a 5-year plan, because Rehnquist was coming May of 2003. So all of a sudden the Weeks room and all of a sudden everybody construction-wise moved very quickly.
Well, what year was it founded? 2001? Mm-hmm. Well, then maybe I came in 2002. I don't know. That was. I remember you saying, "What would you do, to the building?" And I used to go to the post office and look up at the building, and part of the windows upstairs were blocked by a wall. And I remember just saying that, and you had that fixed, so that, because I thought, well, if they look up at that, it was
true.
just a dumb thing, but it, yeah. And I was thinking about Rehnquist, and on that day we had, I heard Carol talking about when Chief Roberts came, Chief Justice, how was it the U.S. Marshals that came and brought a dog, and I remember that happened that day as well, and maybe earlier, and they had snipers on the roofs, and but we had created a list for pictures, honorary pictures, in the Weeks room, and we were I felt almost like I was treating him, like just an object. I mean, he would sit here and we'd move other people out and move people in, and at one point he was standing there and went to sit down, and somebody was moving the settee that he was supposed to sit on away, and I grabbed his wrist, and he looked at me like, what the heck? But if I hadn't grabbed him, he would have sat down and broken his hip probably. But
yeah,
there was a lot of planning for that, for sure.
We had a whole big playbook on it was a few hours, but that was very, very exciting to have him there.
And you got all these other people from the community. I remember Lee Harkness helping, and all kinds of people from probably Billy Stevens and
Oh, it was,
your brother, I don't know, but a lot of people from the community helped make that happen.
and we had just planted sod, and it was really rainy and moist, and we weren't sure when putting chairs out what would happen. And Don Bloomquist got about 1 million plywood panels to put on top to at least make sure the chairs didn't fall. Everybody was falling, left and right.
And then I remember, because it was a rainy day, it was called Twex, and got about 100 umbrellas.
Right, yeah.
And we had those forever.
It's all true.
Yeah.
Forgot about that. And
$10 worth or something, but
yeah, Twix, my golly. Yeah, it was a crazy. As it turned out, the weather was sort of stopped raining from 10 to 11.
mm-hmm.
When we were going to, it was drizzly all day, but not terrible, just a drizzle. And then it sort of stopped when the program went, and then it may have been from 11 to noon, I forget. Then we went to Chautauqua.
Had the lunch, yeah.
And the lunch there. Gosh. So you were there during a time when development and also Raleigh, and you were writing grants to the state, we got stuff from the federal government. Do you remember some of those?
Well, the one that I think Raleigh did a lot of that, a lot by phone, and I might have helped fill in the blanks for applications. I do remember before I left, I talked to Susan Storr, who had a lot to do with downtown Jamestown and getting funding for that. And I asked her how to get a member item, and she suggested going through Hillary Clinton. So, of course, Raleigh would set it up with the phone calls to his contacts, and we ended up getting, I think, $25,000 toward the auditorium, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
And so I remember that. I remember we had the Gebby Foundation at one time had a fundraiser, or not a fundraiser, but a grant writer. I think it was Carol Bremer, maybe.
Oh, golly, yeah.
That they would give you the services for free. And so near the end of my time, or a year maybe, Carol wrote a grant to the New York State Council on the Humanities, and I think we got some money for that.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of it was foundation grants writing, but with all that goes all the setup with the contacts and the meetings and all that. There's a lot of foundation money in that building, and more than I know now, but yeah.
Well, you were in the middle of all that. And do you remember some of the programs, some of the individuals, because between you and then Carol sort of dealt with, on the ground, dealing with the Whitney Harrises and the Henry Kings and those folks. Do you remember interacting with many of the personalities?
Well, a lot of them I was working around in the background and working with, because I was more interested in the development fundraising aspect. It was more with the guests we had. I mean, the people that came to see the program. So, but Whitney Harris was quite a character, I remember, and we had a private dinner with him in the auditorium, which I think was the first time we did that kind of thing. And he was just really funny and lovely, and going around telling, this is my buddy, talking about somebody or other. But he was the one I remember a lot. A lot of the children's authors I got a chance to. I had always wanted to write children's stories.
Mm-hmm.
And I had read a lot of adult junior fiction, I guess, with my kids, and was always interested in doing that sort of thing myself. So I enjoyed the opportunity to get to know some of them. And the knee bank was a clerk. All those I sort of don't remember a lot, but I remember when I was very brand new, I took Mr. Kneebank's wife around and gave her a tour, and continued sort of a friendship with her for several years.
Tootie.
Tootie, that I knew it was, yeah. She was a lot of fun, and I had the day to show her around Chautauqua, and it was really a delightful thing to have to do as part of your job. And I think a lot of it was I just enjoyed the background work and the details and making sure things went off well. And I was more interested, I think, in the hype and the fun than I was in some of the speakers, which is a hard thing to admit, I guess.
Well, one of the things I remember early on was the intense involvement by you and your husband, Dale Robbins. And one of the earliest things, I'll never forget this, how Dale walked in there, we had that cloakroom.
Yeah.
And it was loaded with cloak. I mean, stuff and junk.
Junk, yeah.
And Dale had a vision of we need someplace to sit down and watch. Do you remember talking to him about that?
Well, I had written down, because I thought maybe you should talk Dale into interviewing, but yeah, I remember that. And well, first of all, that cloakroom, I think on a Saturday, you and Randy and your son and our son Ted, Brent, spent the day, because we had a picture. We've moved now, to a smaller home, but we had a little office off our bedroom at the bigger house, and there was a picture that you had given to Dale with everybody that had worked on the cloakroom.
I remember, now that you mention it, we all got together. It was sort of a work party.
Yeah.
Just to clean the
you and Randy and Brent and Teddy, our son, and Dale.
Yeah.
So that was on the bulletin board in there for a long, long time. But yeah, Dale even had a dream once. I mean, you know how we were all so brainwashed or into it or focused on, the Jackson Center and making it great. He had a dream once that he won the lottery and gave $2 million. And we were going to have, he had this whole thing in his dream about these exhibits and which ones they would be. And we travel a lot to historical sites and have watched a lot of visitor center films, so we always wanted to do that. So wished that could happen. And
this is flashing back to me too, because we cleaned out the cloakroom because it was just an empty cloakroom. We put up a screen, just a screen before all the audio visual came in, but a screen with a projector. We borrowed a projector where we could just show a movie.
Yeah.
We could sit and just show a movie. Now today you think, well, that was ridiculous, but
we tried. We had folding chairs in there, and then eventually, it became a viewing room, or I don't know what we called it, but
that was great.
Yeah, and I was thinking, as far as my whole family goes about being into it, on our 25th wedding anniversary, which must have been around the time I started there, we drove down to Spring Creek and found the foundation. We stopped at the golf course across the street and got permission to enter. And it was, as Carol said on her video, it was just overgrown, but we were able to find the foundation, and I brought a rock back, and when I left the Jackson Center, I gave it to Carol and said, this goes in the archives, this is part of the foundation. I don't know. But yeah, I thought that was pretty funny. And then I think Dale encouraged the idea of a nicer entrance.
Yes. And
then he raised money for the Bar Association room, I think. And
yeah, you did. Let me just underscore that. Probably, there's a story to be told, is Dale felt it was important that the Bar Association be affiliated with the Jackson Center. And when that particular room, which was previously used by the, there was an organization which actually had that as their clubhouse.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And the whole idea of the lease, as each of those little organizations left or disbanded, we then could use it. They had left. I want to think Sovereign something, but they'd left. So the room was available, and Dale took it upon himself, and that's a memory, is to make sure that the Bar Association, it was a Bar Association room, and that every member of the bar participated in the raising of the money, which was like 30 or 40 grand. It was a significant number, and this is for the tape. Not every lawyer is as gracious as guys like Dale, and just being philanthropic. But he got everybody to do it. So he was very proud of the fact that all members had contributed to the bar room.
Yeah, he can be very convincing.
Well, he was, and that was.
And I think somebody talked him into doing that, probably.
He did it, and talking about it and then doing it to me is two different things, and that's among the many legacies, that the Robinses have. There, you and Dale, the Robbins room or the media room, and his contribution of getting everybody to participate at the bar room. That was cool.
Well, Allison and he, our youngest, he was always looking for ways to bond with her. And I don't know how old she would have been when you were starting the programming. So he took her to 2 or 3 things, and so and she's now in fundraising. And one reason we suggested to her that she do fundraising, or as development is the polite way to say it. She works for Barnard College now in planned giving, and she was so good with the people. I would have her hang around sometimes with Father Fuchs or this, if anybody were by themselves, and I'd introduce her and then she'd stay with them. And anyway, they went to some of the early programs, and I think it was Karamatsu. Somehow they were looking outside and saw a wire sparking. Was that Karamatsu?
No, go ahead, tell the story.
And so, I don't know, they must have looked for you or called the fire department or whatever, and they came and put that out. And so I just remember that as an early story. And that was before I was involved. When I was involved, we had some of these programs going on, and I just happened to touch a metal plate for a light switch. And I don't know whether it was before the program or during the program, and I hey, Raleigh, feel this? It was really hot, and then we discovered that the previous owners had just done a lot of extension cords and somehow pinned them into the wall and so forth, so it was permanent, but it wasn't probably very safe. So after that, you guys went for that. I don't know what paid to redo the electric, but
probably something with Raleigh and Bill Parment, of course. Was
yeah,
very
Bill Parment was. Yeah, he was very good to the Jackson Center.
Well, let me do this for the tape. This is a Dale Robbins moment again, with Allison. We were watching the C-SPAN filming of the law clerks of the 1940s, and we were in the audience. Dale and I were just sitting there. He was off to the left, towards the back, where remember there was an exit stairs, where you could go and to a landing and then walk down the stairs outside. And the door was open because it was hot.
Yeah.
We didn't have air conditioning. If you remember those.
That's right, it was hot.
Really hot, the place. And so we had the door open and trying to do anything to get some circulation. And there was this, could hear this arcing.
Okay.
And Dale must have walked up and looked out the door and saw the arcing. And then the next thing you know, electricity went, the transformer went, and the lights went down.
Oh,
So we're in the middle of
that.
filming. And it was John Barrett was interviewing the clerks.
Oh.
All of a sudden, everything stopped. And I go, oh gosh, now what? Well, we were going to break anyways and go for lunch. So of course the scramble was in the dark, get lunch and let's go eat while we figure out what the heck we're going to do next. They're halfway through the interview. And so phone calls were made, Raleigh, Dale, myself, to BPU.
Oh.
And they immediately came up and did whatever one does to fix a transformer that was on a pole, bypassed it, did whatever. And by the time we got done with lunch, it was fixed. A BPU moment saved the day, and we went back to filming. But yeah, that was a crazy crazy day, and it was, I don't know, 2002, maybe 2002.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember Dale and I were just kind of sitting back, kicking back, watching the show, and all of a sudden, and kind of, what the hell was that?
So that's the full story. I just remember, and I didn't remember that it was lunch. I guess I just remember they came home and said, guess what happened?
And so the day, because I was wondering, oh my gosh, you have all this talent, where are we going to complete the interview? We're not gonna
Right.
stop. We gotta go someplace.
Now, was Ed Tomasini doing that from the start?
Yeah.
He was, and is he still doing things?
Still doing things. In fact, I'm trying to convince him to do what I'm doing with you. Because if anybody has seen
Everything, yeah.
it's Ed.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was a, forgot about that. Interesting.
Well, that shows that you needed help raising money, and
Yeah.
you got a lot of money. It was fun.
So, but you're here, you're interfacing with donors, you're interfacing with Raleigh, and you're coming up with ideas, and some of the ideas are stuff that we still use today. Annual funds and stuff like that. Talk about how the genesis of that.
Well, I just remember because I really did, I worked at Chautauqua for probably 13 years. Most of it probably was just very part-time in the development office, but I was trained in that from probably age 27 on, and participated in a big campaign as a staff member. And so I really, I've always liked fundraising for one reason or another. It's fun to see the results. And I just couldn't believe that there was no annual fund or anything when I first started there. And Raleigh and you and probably Randy and I don't know who else raised a lot of good money for that building. But so I don't remember how that happened. I guess I just probably said to you, don't you think you need development? And I'd love to organize it. And so we had all kicked around the Robert H. Jackson Society, which at the time was $500 a year. And I mean, we just had a lot of generous people here in the area, especially. A lot of people who have passed on now, but and I'm not talking about, I mean, Betty LeNay and all that I wasn't really involved with that size of gift, but just getting the local people interested and hyped up, and all the activities that are available still that are free for people to go to. They don't have to pay for all these good programs. And also there were a lot of programs that involved local people too. Like I remember one February during Black History Month, we had a Cummins video series that we showed, and a lot of people from the community came, and then Vivian Taylor and his wife had talked to us about being black in the South, and African American now, I should say. And a lot of people came to those, and even when you had the New York State Bar Association had those educational contests that we ran. And Jim Sword, remember how he came? He had been sort of stuck in where was he? Norway. And he gave his story, and that kind of thing was really interesting. I don't know what you asked me now, but I mean, there were a lot of good local people that were willing to step up and give, and proud to do so.
Well, and you also organized the first Jackson Society dinner. I mean, where we actually annually got together like a Pester Society.
Everything I, introduced was based upon my experience at Chautauqua, because we had the Bester Society dinners, and we had receptions, and we had luncheons. And so I remember thinking, and I don't know if I should talk about this on the tape, but I thought, now what do we have to sell to these people? Because I'd been away to fundraising school too in Indianapolis. I thought, well, we've got a beautiful building that everybody's curious about. We have our programs, of course, but I've got Raleigh and I've got Greg that can talk about things and get people worked up and excited. So we started something called the Ladies' Lunches. And it started with the ladies, women in the area who had gone to lunch with Rehnquist. And I figured if they can go to lunch at such a fee, whichever it was, that they would probably be able to support our society. So I would get different people like Lillian Ney and, Priscilla Robbins, and no relation, and people that were involved somehow in the community, and even Betty LeNay. They would give me, we would host them and invite people I knew or that they knew, and invite them to lunch, hosted by whoever it was, and they would come to lunch, and then somebody would give a pitch and talk about how we were going to start the society, and of course we'd have a tour, and followed up with letters and pictures, and that became very successful for the Jackson Society. I don't know, we did a lot, sort of modeled after Chautauqua. We did a couple lunches at Chautauqua for women that I knew from my days up there, and remember we had gatherings at houses and told people about the Jackson Center and so forth, and then
Betty hosted one at her mansion.
I missed that.
Oh
I
gosh.
guess that was probably after my time, or
I don't know, but I remember that was kind of unique. She just opened up her house, and it was a dog and pony show.
oh, that's nice. Nancy Karp,
Nancy Carr, yeah.
and they've I can't remember their names now. They've passed on. They had been on the board at Chautauqua. Carl Friedland, or no, and some other people. Now I'm just blanking out. But we did a couple of those lunches, and we did a couple of those openings. I must have missed the Betty one. That was maybe before my time. I don't know.
It may have been John Barrett. Yeah, so it's probably 2001, 2, something like that. But yeah, maybe.
And then we started up there with the Tuesday night programs, where you would put on a program about the Jackson Center. That was really good.
At Turner.
Yeah, and that sort of started because you spoke at a community dinner up there, and then you came up with the idea of doing that. I mean, that's still going on today, so.
It is. I forgot about that too. The good thing you're here, Becky. Just again for the camera, and since you set the stage, I might remember it. It was a community dinner, you're right, luncheon, and I spoke, and Bob and Sally McClure
Oh, yes. So
came up and said, you should do something in the winter,
oh, that was their idea. Oh,
and, you know, just for us, because for the residents. Sure, why not? And that was about 2005 when I started that, and I'd spent the whole Turner time period talking about the Nuremberg trial, since it was the 60th anniversary
oh yeah.
of the trial, and I didn't know that much about it. I mean, you know enough to just do an hour, but we spent 10 one-hour sessions on it, therefore I had to learn it,
Yeah.
and I showed a lot of VHS tapes at the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, wow. Thank you for prompting me here.
And then I don't know when the first Jackson lecture was at Chautauqua. It was when I was there.
Jeff Stone.
2005, 2004, I don't know. I remember that some people I'd worked with at Chautauqua, their volunteers, were worried that we were going to take away a lot of their money for a big endowment campaign. I'm like, no, I wouldn't worry about that, but it was kind of fun.
Jeff Stone was our first lecturer. He was the dean of the University of Chicago Law School. And I remember he spoke that afternoon, and then we had a dinner, our Jackson Society dinner at the center. And it was very hot. And as you know, I mean, the whole place...
It was hot, because I remember, I remember coming down from the lecture, racing down to get things ready, and being very hot.
And we didn't know where to hold the damn thing because it was so hot. And wherever there was it, we ultimately decided to go in the basement. It was just a little cooler than upstairs. And Jeff was a sport because he talked too. he sweat right through everything. I mean, he was just soaking wet, and we all were. And it was, that really helped instigate the request for more money for air conditioning.
Yeah, that's true. Because when things go wrong, like something, a spark or whatever, I mean, it just shows that you needed help. And we were all so excited about everything that,
All new.
yeah. And the one thing that was fun is when I started, we used to meet, I think, Tuesday mornings and Saturday mornings for coffee, and we'd sit around and talk about things. And sometimes my husband would be there, sometimes your wife,
Yeah.
Randy, Raleigh, you. And we'd come up with ideas and just, oh, okay, let's do it. It wasn't like you had to go through a big bureaucracy or take much time deciding things. It was like, yeah, oh, okay, let's try it.
You're absolutely right. I tell people that among us, with you and Dale and Rob, and we'd meet at Riders Cup Saturday morning.
Riders Cup, what time, like 8 o'clock or something?
It was early.
Yeah.
And that was sort of where we were bullshitting about stuff, and we say, well, that works. It took about 10 seconds.
Yeah.
And I remember Dale, one of our early sessions was the law dialogues, and he had a relationship with Ambassador Kruger.
Oh, yeah, that's her, yeah.
And he said, why don't we, I'll reach out if you can figure out how to use it. Well, of course, it worked perfectly. And Dale also bought his books, and that became part of the...
Sponsored him, I think, yeah.
And so he came up, and he's been in touch, I know he's been in touch with him since. There much continues, but we use his lecture a lot.
Oh, really? Yeah. Oh, yeah. He's a remarkable man. He's in his 80s. I can't remember how old he was when he came here, but he's still very sharp. And he and Dale talk every so often. And we've talked about going down to visit him, but we haven't done that. So he lives in Texas. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I can remember the Brown versus Board of Education. I don't know if you remember this, but Dale, we had always gone to football games as a family, and we'd been to Green Bay and all these places, and the football players all had, or the teams had these big heaters, blowing on the football players. And when we were talking about where could we have the Brown versus Board, because it was a sizable audience, I don't remember how big, but I remember saying, well, in the football fields, you could have those kind of blowers and surround the amphitheater with some kind of material, and then you took that and worked it out with Chautauqua. We didn't have to do it with heaters, but I mean, that's how things came along. We just thought, hey, this would be, we could try that. Oh, okay. And then somebody would call somebody.
That Chautauqua Brown thing blew up. I mean, as far as time, people interested. I mean, it happened to be, I connected with them like 18 months before their 50th, and they hadn't, I don't think they processed that it was the 50th.
Yeah.
And then as it got closer, they wanted to kind of back out. They wanted more money.
Oh.
Because we got Cummins engine to really support.
Oh.
I mean, like $40,000 or $50,000.
Oh, was that? Okay, I remember they had a big
stake in it. And they actually flew the Brown sisters out on the Cummins plane to Jamestown. And they brought all their top guns. I mean, the top CEO and others were here in the amphitheater. But the amphitheater story was, it went from doing it at the Jackson Center to ultimately the Reg, and then, which schools galore wanted to touch the hem of Linda Brown. And they were studying Brown versus Board for the Regents. So everything, Rochester, everybody wanted to come. So I thought, well, let's see if the amp, let's go to Chautauqua. I remember negotiating with a guy who was from Erie, saying, we'd like to use the amp in April. I go, wow, it's a mess, we don't clean it. I said, well, here's what's going to happen. Of course, then they finally, to their credit, agreed on doing something they never, ever did, was let the amp be used before the season.
I think we had to pay to clean it, didn't we?
We had to clean it. That was the deal. Clean it.
Yeah.
Don't worry. Of course, then it's April.
Yeah.
in April, you know, we don't know what the weather's going to be like.
But it was a nice day, wasn't it?
was spectacular.
I remember another picture that was up on that bulletin board was Allison and me at that. I just remember I had a jacket on, but I always wear jackets, but it was a nice day.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
75 degrees, sunny. The good Lord was smiling on us.
We were
that
blessed. Yeah, we really were in a lot of ways. How things worked.
Yeah, that was crazy because we were nervous about it, but that was the only place big enough to really house all the school buses that wanted to come down. And of course, we wanted the more the merrier.
Of course.
And we wanted Cummins engine right to be in the front row, you know, looking at this massive amount because they had invested heavily, and Betty Lene and everybody else. But yeah, that was a really
Did we had a luncheon after that too, didn't we? At the Athenaeum?
We had dinner.
A dinner, okay, thanks.
I think it was a dinner the night before. Dinner the night before with all the clerks, because we had the clerks there the day before.
Oh, yes, I remember that, yeah.
And then the event with Linda. And what I really remember is all these highfalutin lawyers who were the clerks of the Supreme Court justices. I mean, they're all deans of law school, you know.
But all very nice people.
Oh,
That's, yeah.
But they all went over to the Linda Brown table to get her autograph,
Oh, they did? Oh,
which was just cute.
yeah.
Nicholas Katzenbach.
Oh, yes, I remember.
Had a lot of heavy hitters that day.
All in all, I mean, we saw a lot of wonderful people and bought books, and we still have the books, and you know, that's what we moved when we moved. We still have a Jackson shelf, and but yeah, I guess as an attorney, you're probably more interested in what they were saying, but I just enjoyed meeting them as people and, you know, taking them around if they needed to go somewhere and just making sure they were comfortable. And it was just a lot of fun meeting those people. And they were people having to do with international law, people in the top, I don't know what you call it, echelon of all that, and being able to meet them and know them. That Safferling, I forget his first name.
Christoph.
Didn't he come here too? And then we had him in Germany. And yeah, there were just a lot of really nice people that had accomplished a lot, and they were very down to earth, most of them.
You got a lot of notes there, man.
Well, I don't know. I just remember out the windows. I was just trying to think of things. People. I was there the first time Jeopardy called and wanted to know something about Jackson for their program, and I think they've called again soon. Here's another, as you know, Dale and my husband and I have a son named Theodore, and basically we had both read all these books about Teddy Roosevelt, and I'd read one by his wife and this and that, so I was thrilled to be able to meet Nancy Roosevelt, who was Teddy's granddaughter. And then, of course, Melissa Jackson, she still on your board?
No, but I just talked to her yesterday, ironically.
Yeah, so getting to know them was, and you interviewed Nancy, and I think I just watched the tape. I don't think I was in the room, but I knew who she was talking about because I read a lot about Teddy Roosevelt. So that, I really enjoyed that. And that family, and I also enjoyed the Jackson family too. Very nice people. And Nancy, of course, was married to Jackson's son, Bill. Yeah. Bud Schulberg, I remember him being there. And Aaron Beckwith, I took him to the Boys and Girls Club at Chautauqua, and he showed his program. And it was in the girls' club building, and the kids really, it was right after lunch, and they weren't really paying good attention. I remember that, but I took him places, and I had to have a little step stool for him to get into my Suburban. I used to drive Suburbans, and I don't know, he was just a kick. And Carol Drake was talking about, I don't know if it was the same time, but we had a group of students from the Jewish camp that's
Camp Stone,
somewhere near Sugar Grove. And they came, and somebody gave them a talk, maybe you, but somehow that got out of control. They ran all over the building. They went up to the attic and they were looking.
Really, I don't remember that, but
Yeah, it's probably good you weren't there. But that was, whew, I remember that. But you mentioned, or Carol mentioned that that he showed the movie, I guess, and then kids were going all over downstairs.
You may remember that. I do remember.
I don't know if it was the
Aaron.
same thing.
It was Aaron Beckwith, and what he did, because how it worked out, he would talk a little bit, and then we'd show the movie, and then he would take questions. And
Yeah,
it could be either me asking questions or kids from the audience asking questions. That was the program.
yeah.
And during the part of that program, and I'll never forget this, he said, well, Aaron, do you have any wrap-up message you want to leave? Sort of that last question. He goes, yeah, I want to make sure everybody knows that part of the Underground Railroad is here, right down here. In fact, everybody will go down to the basement, and afterwards, he just announced it.
How many kids? Was that the
200
full?
kids.
Oh my gosh.
And
Yeah.
I could see my eyes looking for any help, whether it was Carol or you or anybody.
I don't think I was there for that.
Holy, what are we going to do? And the docents that were there, Jim Ori, I remember that. And because we had to go, and you may remember this, we had the best way to get to the basement was either through the kitchen,
Right. Or
the
through that bathroom.
which
Yeah.
was a wild thing because it's small bathroom,
Rickety
stairs. Yeah. So we somehow quickly managed, because the kids, of course, are all excited because they want to see
The Underground Railroad.
railroad, which, and so.
It's just like an entrance to a tunnel
Yeah, it's
that was filled in.
Yeah, so but the excavation's
was
still
there.
there. It's there. And there's the arch on the floor, which,
Yeah.
I don't know I still don't know, but I go with the story. It's a good story. And so Aaron said we had to go through 200 people, figure out how to do that, so without having chaos. So we had to march them down through and into the bathroom, down the stairs, around, turn on the light, which was hard to do because it was just a pull string.
Yeah.
And then walk them now back through, and of course, they go where all the Masonic stuff was, and the skeleton, and the
So they
casket.
saw that. So,
Oh, gosh.
well, you can imagine the day that you weren't there, I guess, for this camp. I mean, there were kids just running up to the attic. I was like, we didn't have teachers or anybody. I think there might have been a camp director. Somehow we got them out of there, but I can't imagine 200. It was, I don't know how many we had, but there had to be 50 kids running all over, and I'm like, never again for this without some kind of controls. Oh, yeah, we had a lot of funny things happen. I don't know. I was thinking about interns, and Paul Westerberg, I don't know if you remember, he was there maybe one summer and looking at correspondence, Jackson correspondence, and now I think he's either at the National Archives or the Smithsonian, or he married another archivist, and so, I mean, that came from here. And Kristen Leal was an intern when I first went down. Now she's an attorney here. Do you remember Anthea, the English? She was from England. Her husband was an engineer at Cummins.
Yes.
I don't know what she did, but she was a lot of fun. I enjoyed having her around. And they went back to England at some point. But do you remember?
She wrote, it was like Anthea Epson or something like that.
Something like that.
She wrote something that was on our webpage for a while.
Okay.
On Jackson, yeah.
And remember, we had different webmasters. Ann Abdullah, Linda Cowan. I always mix her last name up, but yeah. And there was a woman here from Brazil or something, and her husband. I can't remember his name.
This
Do you
is
remember?
great. No, I don't.
And it crashed. I remember the website crashed, and so they went back to wherever they were from at some point. And then I don't know who you got. Maybe Linda Cowan then. And you had the Bush Industry people got. Didn't they set up the website initially? And
And kiosks, remember they gave us a
Oh,
bunch
yeah.
of kiosks.
We had kiosks that when people came to visit,
Touch.
yeah, you could touch things. And did they set those all up?
Set them all up, and we worked with them to do the graphics, and then we had an audio, in fact, I'd love to find it, of Bard Shack. Remember the attorney Bard?
Yeah.
He was the voice.
Oh, yeah.
He was the voice. This is
Oh, yeah.
great. It's such a bass.
Where is that stuff, I wonder?
I don't know. When we got rid of the kiosks, we donated them elsewhere because we were now going to have a flat screen, touch screen, the whole new technology that you guys inspired with the viewing room. You know, remember that touch screen?
Oh, yeah. And then we had to go in the back or something to set up whatever video.
Yeah.
I don't know.
It worked.
It
for a long
worked.
time.
Yeah. What's going to happen to that room?
Honestly, I haven't been back in there and see. And it's now almost done, so
Oh, that's good.
they'll invite you back for the tea. They have societies coming up, so
Oh, society. Well, I know there's.
little teas for people to come.
Oh,
You know,
very
taking,
good.
Taking your idea.
Oh, from the lunches. Yeah,
lunches,
good
and
idea.
then take a tour like you did.
Well, I know you have these tea sessions that I am at work, so I get the. Your executive director, Kristen, interviews people, and people can watch it on Facebook,
YouTube,
I think.
Facebook, yeah.
Yeah, I thought that sounded good. Yeah, I wondered what would happen to that, since, I did that really for Dale, Dale's honor, but I don't know what else I can think about.
There's a lot of stuff there. Maybe it's
Well, yeah, cleaning out the cloakroom, going down to, and Karamatsu. So that wasn't when the electric arc then.
No, it was just before that. Before that. But Dale was definitely Johnny on the spot. We all scrambled because we didn't know. All of a sudden, arc, and then no lights, and then anyway.
Right in the middle of the show.
We're in the middle of a show. So, and what I will say is, it was at a time where Jackson had the clerks were all 1940s clerks, and John Barrett was just starting to go in to the question of Jackson's relationship with Hugo Black
Oh,
and Douglas, which is very contentious, and John was going to ask the clerks what they felt, because they lived it, about that.
Oh, yeah.
And you could just see they were looking at each other.
like how much do we say?
Exactly. And then
They were saved by the bell.
they were so saved by the lights. And what I remember really, because it was that during lunch they sat together and talked about whether they should talk about that aspect of Jackson and Hugo Black, which for historians would have been fascinating, is fascinating, and they agreed to talk about it.
Oh, they did. Okay.
So, but I'm not sure they would have, but for the opportunity to sort of huddle among themselves during the lunch,
Well, so it was
it worked.
meant to be. That's neat. Well, and
Go ahead.
go ahead. No, you go ahead.
No, you were terrific. You know, when you talk about those early days and formative days, and there's no playbook for this thing. You just sort of did it by.
Yeah, and you know, of course, came up with all kinds of ideas, and we would scramble to make them come true. I remember one day I was there in the afternoons. At one point, I think after Carol used to work till maybe noon or something, and then we would lock up, and or maybe 2 o'clock, and I'd go upstairs or just be there by myself. But we didn't really have anybody there to give tours in the afternoons. Do you remember that? You probably don't, because it's a long time ago. But I don't even know where I was going with that. And I remember the flagpole thing. I think I do, unless it's sort of like I remember you said something about Cindy somewhere I was where you were speaking, and your wife said she was sure she'd heard this fellow speak before, and then you realized it was just he was on the tape that we used to show people.
That's right.
Because we used to just have like a plug on the floor in the auditorium,
Yeah,
and
gosh,
show
yeah.
like this video from down on the floor, and now of course it's
Well, we still show that first video we put together, cobbled together with Sandra Day O'Connor.
Yeah. When you had her come here for the statue.
Well, I didn't have her come, but 1996 was before us, but she said all the neat things, and we just sort of built a little.
Yeah.
Ed Tomasini, I remember, we had to have something in this, for Dale and everybody else. We got to show something. If we're going to be like any museum, you got to show something about the guy. So we used that. I remember sitting down with Ed saying, all right, here are 4 VHS tapes, and we're just going to put them all together into a 10-minute segment. Here's what I would like. Here, this point, this time. I don't know how to do it. You do it. And he did it. And we still show it to this day because it tells the story through really Sandra Day O'Connor.
And there's a picture of a man on there, real big face, I think.
Yeah.
And is that the one she thought she'd seen?
Yeah.
I thought that was pretty funny because I can understand how that would happen. I don't know, some of the volunteers we've talked a little bit about, but like Gloria Lasser and Fran Galbato really became lifelong friends. Gloria and I used to meet every 3 weeks or so for lunch at Friendly's, and we had a lot in common with our children and so on, and she was a lot of fun. And then of course Fran, she was wonderful. And Carolyn Volk was good, but there were a lot and Lou Maisie, and just a lot of really good people. And they had no egos about anything. They were just there to help and get things started. And then, like at Christmas, we had different florists come in and decorate different rooms, and everything was done by quite a bit by volunteers.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And the Christmas tree, remember that came from Dan Bratton, Anita.
I almost gave you one when I moved, but then it's just too difficult to put together. But they had a beautiful tree, and that was took some knowing how to put it together, didn't it?
It did. We had to have some real professionals. Ann Cole became sort of the expert on that.
What a lovely person she is too.
Yeah.
To have, is she still volunteering?
No, but she's certainly
Still involved.
Yeah.
Wasn't she volunteer of the year or something?
Mm-hmm.
And back to Bush, the graphic designs, was that Sherry Burke?
Sherry Burke did some of that. Do you remember Annette Leith?
They were before me, but Sherry actually lived in my neighborhood in Lakewood at one point, but now I think she's a school teacher. That's why I remember her mostly. But I thought they did a very good job with the graphics at the beginning, and we had a glossy newsletter that eventually I worked to do that. And now, since I've gone, working somewhere else, I've learned how to use Publisher and some of those things that I really could have easily done back then if I'd known how to do it.
None of us knew how to do anything.
No, we all just, So, I don't know. Do you have any other thoughts about it? I just remember putting on those dinners, and we had the receptions, and you would research people and find them, and that's what I was going to say. I just remember being there one afternoon and getting a call from the California Bar Association or some lady in the LA area, and they wanted to have somebody come out and speak, and finally they paid Raleigh. Raleigh then followed it up, and they paid him to come out there and speak. And that's another thing you mentioned, Dale. Alec Whiteman, who was one of the managing attorneys in a big law firm in Ohio, and puts on musical programs himself in Columbus. He set up something with Henry King, I guess, spoke at the Ohio State University Law School. And so that got people there interested in it, I hope, I don't know. But you just kept throwing things up on the wall and trying to see what worked and what stuck. And we worked, and we worked like 70 hours a week sometimes. That's what I remember, but it was all labor. Like I'd go home if Dale took a nap after dinner, which he normally did. I'd sit down at the computer and write grants or do whatever, We were just always working on it. So it was more of a a way of life than a job. But we had a lot of fun.
And you did a great job, and it's and sometimes it's hard to, with a lot of not-for-profits, there's a lifespan. You get all juiced up and get excited, and there's sort of that crest that levels off, and if it doesn't, they have a lot of not-for-profits have a short lifespan. And we're turning 20, and it's a time to pause and reflect on those like yourself and Carol and Raleigh and Jeanette, and standing on the shoulders of Carl and Betty and Dan. Here we are, 20 years later. It's
remarkable, really. And with all the things that are going on in downtown Jamestown, or all the efforts that are, the National Comedy Center has sort of spurred things forward, but the fact that we have the Robert Jackson Center and the Roger Tory Peterson Institute, which the Jackson Center, even its location, is pivotal to the success of all the things that people can do when they come here. And I know a lot of people come here for the Jackson Center too, initially, and then maybe they'd go to the National Comedy Center. But a lot of money has gone into that place, and we need all the resources of the other organizations like the Jackson Center. And some of that downtown money is in your current renovations?
Yeah. The $10 million DRI grant that came to the city, we ended up getting $1.5 million. So that's what's gone into the building.
And what are you doing there, really? I mean, I know you're fixing up the entrance. Air conditioning.
Air conditioning. There's an elevator. They're going to use the whole the front of the building.
Okay.
Is really.
What will that be? Offices, or are you going to have displays?
Classrooms, and they'll be there's a second phase which will lead to where the library was. Remember the Henry King Ralph, where your office was? That's going to be renovated for classrooms, and bringing in hopefully relationships with law schools and colleges that we're working on. So
that's terrific. Yeah, because we always wished we could use, at the time when I was there, we talked about using the downstairs of the mansion more as exhibit area. Oh, and the archives too. That was important to me. I thought I didn't know how many archives we had, but how many things we had. But I always pushed that with Raleigh, and so I was pleased when somebody decided to build that out, the archives rooms.
And then the phase 2 that will expand, because we're full. We didn't have hardly any archives when we first got started. We were, fishing for everything.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden kept catching. So now we have a lot.
Books and files and
Nuremberg prosecutors and law clerks.
Oh, they're all
files are all there, and getting a full-time archivist at some point, and who could really work the files is the next aspect.
Yeah, well, you've got to look for that foundation rock that I brought.
That's right.
Yeah, I use it as a paper holder. It's a paperweight, I guess I should say. I don't know, we had a lot of fun. It was very exciting, and I'm glad I had that experience. And one thing, I had started out in in newscasting, and then I worked one school year at JCC in the community relations office, and I really didn't like. I liked some of the work, but I felt like I was begging for publicity when I would ask somebody if we could have an article in the Post-Journal or something like that. I don't know. I felt like I was begging. So then I ended up going to Chautauqua and learning all about how to raise money and so forth. And then I loved that. And that included PR type writing, but I wasn't in the public relations office. So I never really thought I liked communications and public relations. But when I was at the Jackson Center, I ended up doing the newsletter and most of the news releases and taking pictures, and I realized I really did enjoy that, and that sort of led me to the job I'm in today. So it was a great experience.
But you developed a lot of, because of who you are, really good relationships with the Post-Journal, WJTN, and the radio stations, and Jim Roselli and Dennis Webster, and of course Christy Herbst were huge supporters of what we did, continue to be, but really in the early days they gave us all kinds of attention.
Yeah, well, you had a lot to do with that. So yeah, we have wonderful small town media people. I mean they're not small town, but they're in a small city, so you have the opportunity to get to know them, and I mean it's a good product you're selling, so they enjoy it too. They need things to cover. So and John Whitaker, I think, who's now the editor of the Post-Journal, was one of the early writers you had involved, I think. So that he was wonderful. I remember we had something going on, and I had a thyroid operation, so I wrote all the stuff up ahead of time. I don't know whether you were having, maybe it had to do with the dialogues. Anyway, it was a series of articles, and I supplied them to him and said, could you please put this in on and he got them in when I was out for like 2 weeks. So they love it too.
It's terrific. Well, you've been terrific. Thank you, Becky.
Well, you're blowing me up with the glory gun, as Raleigh used to say. But we had a lot of fun. It was a great opportunity to get to know you and Raleigh and Randy and Jeanette too, I guess. And I wasn't as involved with her as I was with you guys, but and then Carol Drake came, and that was a great addition. And you've had some good folks, and 20 years. That's
hard to believe. Here we are.
Yeah.
December 14th. Put it on your calendar.
It's my husband's birthday, but we'll see.
Well, there we go. We'll break a cake out for Dale.
Okay, well, thank you.
Thank you. That's great.